Hi everybody, it's Dr. Francine McInnes. We're just getting ourselves set up to go live at noon. So if you're just joining, you might want to put in your questions into the comment box. I'm just going to be on standby till people start to arrive. Hey, bonjour Carole. Content que tu sois là. Oh, how fun. We've got some friends and colleagues joining the call. If you're just joining, it's Dr. Francine McInnes. We're going to be talking about perfectionism and performance during the COVID confinement period. If you can just stand by, we're waiting for people to join. We would like to start at noon. So feel free to throw in your questions or your comments, topics you would like me to say more about. Good morning, Nick. Kind of fun to see some friendly folks commenting there among my peeps. Hello everyone who's just joining. We're on standby for a few minutes, just giving people a chance to arrive, so feel free to put in questions or comments. Won't be long before we get started. There was a poll that was put out. Emily from the Montreal Therapy Center had sent out a poll asking you what topics you were most interested in. And the two that we have so far is more about growth mindset. Hey, Spessy, hello. So nice to see you from a distance there. I miss you. Hello, Mara. Yeah, so please do. We have two topics that have been highlighted as most of interest so far, which is growth mindset and setting intentions and goals. But you are welcome to add more questions and comments to that while we're waiting for others to arrive. Oh, how fun. So nice to see you join. Thank you. You're also free just to put in why you joined, what's interesting about this topic to you, so I have a sense of what I should speak more about. And this live Facebook session is new to me too, so I don't know if you have experience with this, but this is a new experience for me, so I'm glad you're here to join me, and we'll figure it out together. Won't be long, a couple more minutes. All right. I decided to sign in a bit early because you never know how the technology is going to work just as you get started, so looks like we're in good shape. Okay, we have a few new people joining. If you're just joining, to let you know, we're going to start in a couple of minutes. We're talking about perfectionism and performance during COVID. If you have questions you'd like to ask or comments or topics you'd like to hear more about, you can just put those in the comments. And for those who are there, know that don't easily feel interrupted. So comment along the way so that I know how this information is landing for you and what you find interesting or confusing if that's the case, or would like more about, because it feels more like we're having a meeting together that way if I can see where you're at. See if I can move things around here. Ah, okay. Oh, hello, Christina. I need to move things down. Okay, Priscilla. Looking forward to this. Oh, great. A psychology student and clinical intern. The clinic here in West Island. Oh, that's excellent. Okay, in the context of the pandemic, yeah, well, maybe I will start with that in just a moment, because that's actually what tipped me off to do the video and hold this session, was how it arises in the context of the pandemic, which is both a risk factor and an opportunity, in my opinion. Oh, Mara, how do you ask questions? You just put them right in the comment box, and then I will try and track those and get to them. So please do feel free to put those in, Mara. Okay, Mara's interested in the topics, and would be interested in strategies. Oh, okay, great, for people who have it. Okay. All right. Well, people might keep joining, so I'm gonna get started with those comments and questions that have already come in. But let me reintroduce myself. I'm Dr. Francine McInnes. I'm a psychologist in Montreal, and the two kinds of psychology I do are clinical psychology and organizational psychology, which means psychology in the workplace. And I bump into perfectionism just as much in both settings, because this is something that comes up in the professional realm all the time. And it comes up in the clinical realm because people in the professional realm are often working on this, because it can be quite challenging. So for those just joining, please feel free to put your comments and questions in the chat box so that I can circle back around to them. So let me start by talking a little bit about where this came from. And essentially the context for this was that I was really hearing comments and questions and hearing reactions that were suggesting to me that perfectionism was alive and well during COVID. And so maybe a couple of ideas around what that might sound like, and in a couple of different, maybe a few different ways that might express itself. So when I put the title of this of "You Can't Do COVID Wrong," I was definitely getting the impression that some folks were really feeling overstimulated by how they're supposed to do all the right things, and having a particularly heavy set of expectations that they're always supposed to know what all those things are, and they should be doing them perfectly. And you could just imagine extrapolating from there the impact of doing it wrong and feeling really bad about it. And in the current context, and as we've come to see, the right things that we're meant to be doing is changing all the time. So it puts this pressure, this unrealistic or unfair pressure on people to feel like they're on top of it all and understanding it all and applying it all perfectly, when first of all that information changes, so we can't be perfectly on top of it. And secondly, we're still humans, so there's a level of understanding and judgment and imperfect application of the rules. So there's even just trying to get what we're supposed to be doing and figuring out how to apply that was creating pressure. So can it just be about what am I supposed to be doing and how do I do that? Another form of perfectionism in this context, I would say, is this expectation, and I've heard this throughout, and I have a lot of empathy for this, is that I would say it's less professional and more in this like other realm of, on some level, we expect that things are paused or slower in our regular work, and that we're meant to be accomplishing this other stuff, whether or not that's household tasks or creative endeavors or volunteer work or contributing to the cause in some form or other. Highly laudable. So you can't be against somebody's intention to want to do that. But people are affected from a stress standpoint, from like a distress standpoint, about absorbing all of the change, feeling the loss of their usual activities, feeling the effects of isolation and not being with your peeps and having affection and contact and conversation the way we're used to. So people are not feeling at their optimum whatsoever. They feel quite affected by what's going on. And so these expectations of these extra things just doesn't sound fair all the time to people, that they're meant to, because there's this little extra space, to fill it with these, for example, creative endeavors, which is a wonderful opportunity for some, not for everybody, but for some, to reconnect with creative interests and so on. But the motivation and the attention and the capacity to pick up something new or dust something off and start it again, when we're feeling so much and feeling so disrupted and off our kilter, off our game, is sometimes a not realistic expectation, that we need to back off on the pressure for a lot of these things. Which leads me to this third category of folks who are the folks who are in artistic professions. So, musicians and painters and craftspeople, for whom that inspiration to create art or to perform is very much affected by their mood and motivation of the time. And so when we're all feeling loss or stress, being able to create and produce is not as straightforward as it sounds. So all this to say that there's a lot of context for why this seems like a particularly timely topic. And as I was mentioning in the video, perfectionism has its roots in anxiety. It's a form of coping that people will, not consciously, but they learn that this is a way for them to feel a sense of control and a way to make things feel okay, to make them feel like, if I can just perform well, things will be okay. I will be okay. I will feel more secure and in control of things. And so you can imagine right now that folks would feel quite activated, because we feel way out of control right now. There's a lot of unpredictability and uncertainty. And so, for perfectionists, the go-to is, how do I perform? And as I was just mentioning, performance is quite compromised right now by the mood or the moment of the day. Like, it fluctuates. I will say that some days I feel quite regularly productive, and other days I don't. And there's no particular explanation for why one day or the other, but expecting particularly high performance because we're supposed to right now, I think sets us up for a failure experience, because if then we don't meet that expectation, then it creates additional distress of failing when we were already pretty stressed out to begin with. So maybe I could circle back to what perfectionism is, like what are the pieces of that. And you can find all this online, but I'll give you sort of the top line explanation of what it is. So those who study it and measure it talk about there being three parts to perfectionism. The first being expectations of perfection towards self. So I expect myself to be performing perfectly. The second piece are felt expectations from others that we should be perfect. So there's this perception that people have out there towards ourselves that others are expecting our perfect performance. And we can all immediately go to the question of how true that is, because often those expectations of perfection are our own that we see in others. Maybe sometimes people are making unrealistic expectations of us, and we can decide what we do with those. But sometimes the expectations we perceive are not other people's expectations of us. They're ours, kind of being projected onto others. And the third component is around expecting perfection of others. So you can imagine the impact of each of these pieces. So what I've been speaking about so far is much more that expectation we place on our own shoulders to be perfect, when it's really not fair under the best of circumstances to be expecting perfection of ourselves all the time. But particularly right now when we're feeling off our game, we need to adjust those expectations so that they're more achievable. And this is important, the topic around setting intentions and goals, that those goals and intentions are challenging, yes. I mean, that's really when we achieve a challenging goal or intention from a what makes people well, what makes people happy standpoint. That's a good thing to do, to set a somewhat challenging goal, because when we accomplish it, there's a very strong sense of accomplishment or progress or reward that gives us an emotional boost that elevates our mood, which is really helpful right now. We could all use that sense of accomplishment or progress when our mood and motivation is pretty laggy right now. So it is a good idea to set some expectations and maybe even challenge ourselves a little bit to try something, even though we might not already know how to do it. And I think that's where it's key, is that we want to set the bar at a reasonable level for what we're trying to do. So first of all, we need to adjust that bar based on current circumstances, because right now we're already under a lot of stress. And secondly, if we're trying something, for example, we haven't done for a while, which I've heard lots of people reconnecting with old interests, talents, activities, knitting, painting, cooking, whatever, gardening, whatever the case, there's some appetite to try some things, but these are not things that we necessarily do all the time. So again, it's great. It feels like there's an opportunity that's special right now, if there's a little window of space that there isn't normally, to pick up something new or old and familiar, but bring it back, but with reasonable expectations of, you might not remember exactly how that works or exactly how you did it, or you might be trying to do it in a new way. So it's a good idea to set experimental conditions. So when you're in something new, and I mentioned this in the video, and I would invite you again, if you didn't check it out, to go check it out. And I've put the video in the reference on the Montreal therapy site. And basically, Eduardo Bricino, I think Bricino was his name, gives a TED talk around setting experimental conditions. So you create this bubble in which you are trying something new or reconnecting with a passion that you used to have but haven't done in a while. And you give yourself different criteria. So you go in there expecting to discover, expecting to try things, and expecting that they're not going to work or work perfectly well, because you're tinkering, you're experimenting, you're exploring. And in that space, there's no expectation for perfection. There should not be expectation for perfection. And that's what makes that space so attractive. And this is one of my favorite areas of space. That's why I'm talking to you here today, because, oh cool, get to try something new. And that means it gets to be imperfect, but it expands the person, because you're now adding something to your repertoire that you will over time learn how to do. And so that makes me and my skills bigger rather than smaller by playing it safe. So think about anything you're trying out or expanding into or reconnecting with, put it in the experimental bubble and give yourself a big, huge sandbox in which you get to knock around and make mistakes. Then as you start to ramp up and reconnect and start to feel more agile, more competent, then you bring that over into your performance zone, and that's where you start really trying to hit more excellence standards, because you're saying, you know what, this is really interesting, I really want to get into this, so I'm going to ask myself, I'm going to up the standard on this, I want to improve my performance and see if I can perfect it over here. But not first without getting into learning the skills. Then you can try and tweak it and get it into that high performance standard. So this is a really interesting time for allowing ourselves something new in there with different expectations. Now, a little sub piece of that is to be mindful of, we're going to carry our perfectionistic standards into that. So, for example, when you try something new, you might set out thinking people are expecting you to get it right when you are, those are your own expectations. And I just saw Bessie's question, how can you tell the difference between our own expectations and those coming from others, which is a fabulous question. And so sometimes it's good to get out there. So I like to do is put my own expectations out there and see how people respond. So oftentimes I'm just going to go out there and say, hey, I don't already know how to do this, but I am willing to try it out. And then if I see people saying, absolutely, like that's what we're doing here, more often than not, if we put our own expectations out there and test them, we get feedback. So, and on some occasions, I've found there are spaces where there is no tolerance for imperfection, in which case I adjust my intentions and my interest accordingly. Am I willing to go, even though I think the expectations are kind of high given what I know about this? Then I carry in saying, I'm going anyways. I may still not do this perfectly well, but it'll be what it'll be. More often than not, though, when we put those expectations out there and start talking about them, we end up finding out that those expectations are mine, not theirs. They didn't have those expectations, but you can't mind read. You have to find some way to put the expectations out there so that you can get the feedback that maybe you were wrong. And oftentimes we're wrong a bunch of the time around whose expectations they are. Let me just see, there's another question. Do I recommend setting up a schedule for yourself? Could this contribute unreasonably to expectations if you struggle to stick with it? So this is a great performance question, is should you set a schedule? Well, so on the whole, schedules and structure help facilitate intentions. I would say that I would use some structured intentions. So when I set out my day, I have on a sheet, and I will show you that I have mine just coincidentally next to my computer. I put on this list for today and tomorrow a few things that are the priorities, but I don't schedule them specifically like this exact thing has to happen at that time. There's lots of wiggle room, but the tasks are defined in a flexible, realistic, reasonable way that I can accomplish with flexibility. So even if I don't define it in such a specific, tight way that if I don't do it that way, I've failed. So I do set some blocks of time where before I go for my walk, I'm going to try and get these things done. And if I still got it done before the end of the day, I would consider it a success. So again, more flexible criteria for success. But I would also say that the way you set that up, so you might have noticed a correlation between perfectionism and procrastination. And what often happens is people have such big expectations of themselves and the accomplishment that the whole thing is just at a standstill. It becomes overwhelming. And when I ask people who I can hear are judging themselves pretty harshly about things that are not getting done, that they say, I should be able to do this. This really isn't that big a deal. Why aren't I getting these things done? And I hear labeling, for example, they'll say, why am I such a self-sabotager? What's the matter with me? Which is, the undertone of that is, what's wrong with me? Like there's something broken about them. And it can go into this downward spiral where people just find themselves overwhelmed and paralyzed to get anything done. And if there's one word of advice I could say is that when you get into that paralyzed state is to really take a moment of pause, listen to those messages and think, who would perform well under these expectations? And mostly people do not perform well when people are harshly criticizing them. So you're trying to step back and as dispassionate or neutral or non-judgmental a way as you can and say, what is this task that I think I would like to advance on? Don't even set the goal to accomplish, but to say, I need to progress on this. It's really important to me for whatever reason it's important to you. And what would be a step forward? What could be a step that I could take? And on your daily list, put just that. So, great examples are, I don't know, I want to buy a bike. That's one of mine. Well, you can't just go buy a bike. So you think, why haven't I got that done? Well, there's bits of research to do, and there's criteria to figure out, and there's reviews that you might want to do depending on how you go about things. So try and find a step that would represent progress and put that on your schedule for that day and advance a step forward. And consider it a victory when you get that piece done. Even if you didn't get the whole thing done, you accomplished what you set out to, which was progress. And what you're finding is you're trying to break down what is called the friction of starting, because when you get into the procrastination mode and get overwhelmed, things halt. You get into this inertia, and you're trying to break the inertia. You're no longer trying to accomplish the big thing. You're trying to get things restarted. So if that's an artistic pursuit or a household pursuit, what you're trying to do is get a start. And you would put that on your calendar or on your schedule for the day so that you can grease the wheel and get some momentum going and get yourself unstuck. And if you think about this, we borrow this from Starting Healthy Habits. So there's a whole science of forming and building and sustaining habits that contributes to this thinking. And even when we work with people who are experiencing more depressed emotions or depressive symptoms, people get stuck. They get mired down by feeling insufficient, by feeling unworthy, by feeling incompetent because their mood goes down, their self-perception goes down. And I hear a lot of that going on right now too, because people are not feeling like they're performing. And so you're trying to reactivate, you're trying to get things rolling again by resetting the expectations, because when we do and we accomplish, that feeling of accomplishment or satisfaction is huge in boosting the mood. I'm just going to go and look at another question. Mara, are there certain frameworks or routines that could make tweaking a habit? I feel like if I assume I'll need to tweak sometimes, I will go off to my default, which is to take hours in making it perfect. Frame the routines that could make tweaking a habit. Okay. So yeah, that's the idea is, and this I talked a little bit about in the growth versus fixed mindset. In the growth mindset, it's not pass, fail, or succeed, fail, or perfect fail. It's, in the fixed mindset, and I really encourage you to go check out Carol Dweck on growth mindset. She's just brilliant in the notions, but also the presentation of it. But in that fixed mindset, people have this really tight standard of, and it even prevents people from starting. If it's not perfect, it's a complete failure. And when that's contrasted with growth mindset, everything is continuous improvement. So whatever you produce is already a start. And if it's not what you wanted or expected, that's fine, because you've started, and even a failure or a mistake or however it turns out is progress, because you're learning. So it's all about learning. And if I don't try something, I can't learn anything because I've never left the station. So that framework of growth mindset is basically saying, put yourself into this constant, continuous improvement mode, and whatever you produce is valuable because it's an opportunity to learn. So it completely reframes. And then you're expecting to tweak. So you're producing, you look at it, you say, what do I like about this? Like, one of the things I do is I produce a video and then I watch it, which is exposure, because it's hard to watch imperfect, all of this stuff. And you say, what would I want to do better if I were to do it again? And you don't obsessively do it 100 times. You might redo it once or twice. And then you say, okay, on the next one, here's my takeaway. You don't try and make each iteration perfect. You say, what did I learn? What do I want to apply? And I move on. And it becomes this wheel that you do. And as you do more of them, you become more proficient. And that becomes a different mindset. So I totally check out that growth mindset. Edward Fraser, any tips for teachers who are teaching Indigenous high school students who live in northern isolated communities? Engagement is a challenge. Motivating students also. Teachers are feeling guilt, failure, and out of control. Wow, that's a big question. I love the idea of setting reasonable challenges and expectations. There's this, let me think of where I found this. There's a book called Range, and in it they talk about the benefit for learning integration of struggle, that so much more learning comes from struggle than spoon feeding and making the path easy. The knowledge is retained and integrated so much more effectively. So I would say that I would let go of the usual school expectations, and I would try and get them engaged in something, anything that means something to them, that they would like to learn how to do, and to create the sandbox in which they can tinker with it and try it, see what happens, and then try it again to reinforce process. So if you look at the growth mindset model, there are books that for teachers and for parents that talk about what do you reinforce. And you do not reinforce outcomes, you reinforce process and learning. And so for engagement, you pick tasks or you pick learning sandboxes or focus that means something to them. And then you let them experiment, you let them try things out. And whether it fails or it doesn't, and especially if it fails, to say, wow, good try. Okay, what did we figure out? So what are we learning here? To build in failure and mistakes as very rich, as very rewarding. And when they struggle and get through, it sticks, it's rewarding, and you're building the growth mindset into the process. And it doesn't matter that they're learning what other kids would learn or what's important, because you're teaching them to learn, you're teaching them to struggle and accomplish, which is so valuable beyond school and the academic content in terms of like life experience. I certainly wish I had been educated by somebody who understood growth mindset. And Carol Dweck talks about the damage that schools do in focusing on grades and perfect performance. I know I relate in grade school, for every test and assignment, our results, our papers and tests were given back to us in descending order. Top grade, next grade. And so you can imagine the people at the bottom who were failing repeatedly, getting their test back last, and the damage that does for self-esteem. So to really think about breaking down this fixation on perfect performance. Okay, my sister and I have not spoken for years. We grew up in foster care, had counseling our broken childhood. She has not had therapy. She tried but did not stay. She's now working. I have reached out. Let me just see if I can get to her. I want to reach out again, and I'm scared because she has lots of anger issues and projects a lot on me. I'm very empathic and get into trouble. How can I reach out and take care of her? Okay, and so great. I'm sorry I didn't see your name, Angela, that you are so persistent in trying to reach out to her. And all I could say is presence means so much when somebody is struggling, and that we would have space for people even when they're struggling and they can't accept our help, and that you could set this up in a way that would maintain your offer, your presence to her without expectation. So anything that you could write to her that would tell her that you are still there no matter what, and that you are available and thinking about her, and it doesn't matter how she reacts, that you do not make your effort and present contingent on her approval and engagement, which is super hard to do, but it's so meaningful to people when they can't reciprocate or respond or receive help, that people don't give up on them because they're feeling pretty broken. So that somebody could still be there is amazing. So one, I would just encourage you to keep trying, and two, to protect yourself, to set different expectations, which is just to be present to her and to accept that however she responds right now is how she responds. But know that from a clinical standpoint, when I have clients who talk to me about people who reached out to them when they couldn't respond and how deeply they felt that, they were touched and moved, I would just really encourage you to try and maintain that presence even if she can't respond to you. Are there tools or strategies to break things down as a start? I tend to have difficulty. I'm not sure. I may have already responded to that, but I would encourage you. I'm going to do another video shortly on habit formation. There's a really great two authors. One is Durig, who writes about, I wonder if I can, I can see it over here. I don't want to leave the station, but Durig is the author who writes about habits. He's a journalist, and he lays out how habits are formed. And the other author I would suggest to you is James Clear, who has a book that came out that's called Atomic Habits. I follow James Clear. You can find him online. He has a blog, and he has all kinds of free articles. But the core message when you're trying to break things down and it's called Atomic Habits, because atomic is the smallest possible action that will create a change. And so basically, whatever you break down what you're trying to do into the smallest pieces, and you ask yourself the most minimal start in order to get the wheel moving. No judgment, no expectations. So let's say you wanted to start to run and that feels like a really big endeavor. You just get your shoes by the door. And if you walked and ran for, half a block, you would have started running. So, or if you don't have shoes, then your start is really to go get some running shoes, and you don't worry about the rest. Your step one is to get the shoes. So for example, I have a great neighbor who's just an awesome person, and she's got all kinds of artistic talents. And I've been wanting to learn how to mend things, and I was getting stuck. And one of the wonderful things that she did is she delivered bits of wool and thread and fabric to my door through the mail slot. And it breaks down my step one. I've got stuff to do to start my new endeavors. So, oh, okay, yes, and I will spell Carol Dweck. But for that start is break it down. So, for example, in the book by Durig on habits, he wanted to run, and he was having a hard time. So he would set a schedule, and he would set intentions, and he really paid attention to what's getting in my way each time. He would just, like a scientist, he would assess, where did I get blocked this time? Where did it break down? And then he would tackle that obstacle. So for example, he eventually, I thought it was such an awesome story, he would try, and he even would put the clothes by the door, put the shorts on the shoes, get it all lined up, set his alarm. And what he discovered by tons of observation is he didn't like getting dressed in the cold. He hated getting out of bed and putting on his running clothes to leave. So what he figured out to do is he put a stool next to his bed with his running clothes under it, and he would pull his pajamas off under the covers and put his running clothes on, because that meant he didn't have to get out and feel cold. And it was for him what broke the freeze in his pattern. And so really lots of observation. And I make habits and I keep them for a long time, but I take a long time building them because I know sustainable habits take a long time to build. And so I tinker with, where do I place it in the day? What are the expectations, or what threshold am I setting? So if I've been running for 20, 30 years, I never expect tons. Like, I loosely schedule this kind of kilometers in the week and those kind of kilometers on the weekend, but I mostly just ask myself to go. And if I find out partway there I don't want to do it anymore, I don't require that I complete the usual distance. I just require that I keep my habit going, because that's most important. And sometimes I exceed my goals, and sometimes I reduce the mileage, but my goal is to sustain the habit, because that's what ultimately contributes the most. So those kinds of, these are really great resources. I'll do a separate video on habit formation, because it is the foundation for a lot of other skills. Oh, okay, thank you. Somebody got Carol Dweck's name out there. Thank you for that. Make a visual board with them of how they want to visualize what they're going through. Oh, okay, a suggestion. I would suggest make a visual board with them and how they want to visualize what they're going through. I think that's probably help for our teacher participant. Pam is a nurse. Oh, okay, from nursing. Thank you very much for that suggestion. And then James Clear references there, and Charles Duhigg. Okay, you guys are awesome. We're getting the resources coming right in. So, so far we're talking about breaking the perfectionism habits, because it's a mindset. Perfectionism really aligns pretty tightly with the fixed mindset, and the reason I'm so determined to help people through it is it makes people's worlds and their pictures of themselves smaller instead of bigger. Like, when in Carol and her talk, she's a self-declared, I don't think she says recovered, because I don't know if you recover, but she herself identifies with perfectionism, and she talks about her experiences around, you build your reputation for being excellent, and then you can't venture so readily into new things because you risk losing that reputation. There's too much risk in venturing off into these new islands, because then you're less than yourself. And so you get bound, and it's a bit like anxiety. When people are scared, they pull back and they start getting into this self-protective space. And then before you know it, they've got themselves cornered to stay safe. And meanwhile, at that point, their view of themselves and what they're capable of is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's what perfectionism does, because if you're wedded to only doing things you can do perfectly, that's a really hard thing, if not an impossible thing to accomplish. So it invites people staying in a small space, which is what we do not want, because the rewards are from being out there, from learning, from progressing, from accomplishing, from connecting, which means you got to take risks. And what I found, which is why I got into this more experimental space, I try stuff all the time that I don't know how to do, because it's incredibly rewarding to go, wow, that's what's involved. Okay, I didn't know that. Now I know more. I could try that, and I'm going to do that. Oh, this is what makes this go better. Oh, okay, it's all about that sense of I'm going into something which, of course, I don't already know how to do it, because I'm learning how to do it, which means I'm going to make mistakes, and that's normal. That's expected. Perfection's not expected. And then you get into this groove of trying stuff is cool, and you keep enlarging your skills, you keep enlarging your view of what you're capable of. And that is this really cool distinction between the growth mindset and fixed, is that in growth mindset, there is not this inherent expectation that what you're capable of is innate and is automatic, that it's what you're born with. It's this growth mindset is you continually expand what you're capable of by learning how to do it. And so there's this continuous improvement, and you seek feedback, you seek help from people, and people are helpful. And if I can kind of circle back to Bessie's comment earlier around people's expectations, oftentimes you expect that people think you have to be perfect at things. But when you reach out and say, you know what, I don't already know how to do this, could you help me? It's when you get out of that bubble in your own mind of your own expectations and what you think others' expectations are of you, is when you find out people are unbelievably helpful and generous. And I would say in current times, people are so moved to help that they're more generous and helpful than ever. And so when you set out to take a risk and let people know that you don't know, it's often an additional layer of reward to find out how helpful people are and how well surrounded we are by other people who know, and if they don't know, who are willing to also try. So it's just so amazing when we leave the station, maybe with a mild trepidation, to try something we don't already have to do and take the risk of making mistakes and failure. And that's what psychology is all about, is about helping people grow and thrive. And that means helping them remove some of these barriers, like these mindsets and these expectations that are holding them back. And I personally find that there's all these great models and frameworks to kind of help shift that mindset so we can, unlock some of these things that are barriers to us. And that's what makes it so much fun, is that discovery process. Another example of a reframe that is one that I bumped into maybe a couple of years ago. I read about this on my subway commute. I'll look forward to taking the subway when that's possible again. But so I used to read these short little articles, and in the mental frame that you put around when you're put in your own mind before leaving the station is huge. It's everything. So when you're leaving the station to try something, and I think this was a riff off of the growth mindset, the study that was done, is that they had two groups of students who were going in to write an exam, and they took one group and they just echoed back what was the natural vibe of a bunch of students going in to write an exam, and they said, because you can just feel all of the overstimulation, normally the anxiety, the stress of going in to perform, which is classic for this kind of context that we're talking about. And so the folks running the study would just echo that vibe back to the students and say, "Ooh, it's very stressful. It's very you're going in to perform, and yeah, I can appreciate how anxiety provoking that might be," and it's what they were already feeling. And they just echoed back the students' own vibe. And then in this other group, they took the students and they reframed the sensations, the butterflies, the trembling muscles, the rapid heart rate, all the stuff that goes with performance that we all know very well. And they reframed it and they said, whoa, this is so exciting, isn't it? Like, you've read all of these materials, you have prepared yourself for this performance situation. This is a really exciting moment to bring that knowledge, to bring those ideas, to bring those solutions to bear on this exam. And it's so exciting. Can you just feel the adrenaline going through your body as you get prepared to share all this great knowledge? And lo and behold, the folks in the reframe group actually perform better. So they're all feeling the same sensations, except one group has it in their mind that this is the sensation of performance. This is the sensation, this is what it feels like to go into a performance arena that you have prepared for, and that is quite, just goes with the territory that you're going to have a trembling heart muscles or a rapid heart rate. And it sort of normalizes and also reframes it as, hey, this is you going in to perform. And so anytime now, I've always thought that was kind of a fun and funny study, and particularly that their performance was stronger. And this has been demonstrated across a bunch of different contexts, that the mental mindset that you go in with and how you're framing it to yourself creates better or worse performance than what you're capable of, because they were both equally capable groups. That was held constant to see what does the reframe itself do. So now whenever I'm going into a situation, like if it's a dance performance, something I've not done before, I find I'm hearing that study in my mind going, ooh, Francine, this is very exciting, isn't it? And it is exciting because it's like trying something I've never done before. I don't know what it's going to feel like. I'm really curious to know how it is. And these are all the pieces of that growth mindset that enable us, because we're going in expecting we're going to make mistakes. And so when we make them, we go, and we go, okay, I just learned something. And this is one of the distinguishing characteristics, is that that changes the experience, that it's about going in and developing the skill. And to do that comes mistakes. So that's something I would really encourage you to check out as well, is that to check out these models. And I would say the growth mindset is one of the helpful models. I'll see if I can find that study again around the performance stress versus excitement, because there's some really good research around that. And then around getting your performance going, I think some of the habit formation literature is helpful to say, like, how do I get rolling? What's going to help me? And I talk about it as getting my legs under me, because I find for running and for dancing, which are a couple of my favorite activities, you're just trying to get your legs in the right basic motion, get some basic footwork going, so that you can even think about being a strong runner or a good dancer or a beautiful dancer, runner, whatever is your vision of it over the long term, is not to be applied at the beginning. And even if it's something that you know that you're starting anew, you have to adopt once again that beginner mindset, because you're not in the thick of performance. You're trying to reestablish or reinvigorate a practice or a habit, which means stepping back to beginner mindset, which is just dance or just run or just paint or just write. And so any movement in the right direction is a success and is going to help you to find out, okay, what can I do now to build upon this? Because in that habit formation, Durig also writes a book on productivity. I think it's like making things better, something along those lines, because as you can imagine, there's a link between understanding how habits are formed, how you break the friction of starting, and how you then roll that over into productivity and performance. But before you can be in that space, you have to be in the kicking it off mode. And different rules and principles apply to that than when you are in a performance mode. And so you have to change the expectations and the principles that you used to put yourself into that mode. So I have gone on and on, I realized, hopefully responding to your questions. I wonder, do you have any questions that you or topics that you would like me to say more about, that you have curiosity about? Are there, okay, let me just see if there's any coming in. Ah, okay, Amanda. Suggestions for situation where high performance is expected. For example, Anglophone working professionals trying to work within French environments. Oh, I love that question. Languages take time to learn, but people make snap judgments or expect perfection. Also, extremely stressful being unable to communicate completely, unlike a hobby. Oh, Amanda, I love that question. And I so personally relate to that. I have tons of personal experience because I work in French and in English. And as you can probably guess, English is my most, what's the word, skillful, competent language. And this is the perfect arena for, and in this city, there's so much opportunity for people who dare to move into the bilingual zone. And it is that feeling of, and I will play with the notion of other people's expectations. So I took a job some years ago with CBC Radio-Canada. And if there's a place where people have really impressive French language skills, it is at Radio-Canada. But I decided that if I was ever going to improve my French, this was the perfect opportunity to do so. But I went in with all kinds of excitement about doing it because the quality of the French that I was surrounded by was so high that it was quite intimidating. But I recognized there would be no way to improve except to speak it. And I would say this is the main barrier for people expanding their language skills, is that they get boxed into either their own expectations or other people's expectations of perfect performance when it's completely impossible. And what I will say though is it's very disarming because we're so accustomed, if you're an eloquent communicator, to being so competent that it's difficult to feel so incompetent. But I will say two things. One is, I think often the expectations are different than what we're seeing in others. So my experience was that I have seen across a number of different areas is that I go boldly forth because my French is good enough to be in these arenas. I've tested that first before I put myself in a sandbox that is over my head. So I would find different places to practice. So at dinner parties, in dance class, with friends, you have to get your level minimally to a standard that you can be in a professional realm, for example. Once you've hit that threshold, then you go boldly forth and you start communicating. And again, you can let people know to say, you might insert the odd English word if you're an English speaker and say, okay, I can't remember how that's said in French. More often than not, people are going to jump in and offer you the word or tolerate or accept that you interject English words. The most often the experience is people will support somebody who's trying to learn a language. There are definitely those people who have expectations of perfect performance, which are impossible for somebody learning a language. But far more often, people are helpful. They throw in an expression or they explain an expression. They throw in the word that you're looking for. They're patient. They let you struggle, which I appreciate, people letting me struggle or giving me a hint so that I'm learning, because that's the best way to learn. But it's only when we leave the station and go boldly forth and on s'assume, you just take that space because you're in it, because you have the skills, enough skills to be there. And you don't come out apologizing, but you invite people. Sometimes I might throw in an English word because I'm missing that word, and people will help. And as you start to speak, they'll recognize this is a competent professional. So you don't come across less smart, you come across as a competent professional who's acquiring language skills, which is different from an incompetent person. And you got to give people the credit for recognizing the difference. And I used to fear that people would think I was like, not the sharpest stone in the driveway, because my language skills would get in the way of them recognizing that I didn't know what I was talking about professionally, even when I can't find the words. So first of all, I would create an experimental place to get my language skills to a minimum level that isn't, like you say, I forget how you talked about the context. Like these are high performance contexts. So that's a context in which the standard is higher. So I would put the sandbox in a place that's not my highest performance zone. I would practice it with colleagues, which is professional but not your highest performance, where you're presenting to a client or practicing in front of a class or the public. And then I would enhance my skills and then bring it into a high performance zone where still it can't be perfect, but you've brought it to a level where you have an accomplishable level where you can start to really perfect your skills because you have enough to play in that arena. But I love that because, I find that perfectionism plays into language so much that it prevents people from acquiring skills. And when you can grow some comfort level and skills to operate in two languages, the opportunities, professional and personal, that are open to you, that aren't already open to you, the rewards are so great that it's worth getting past yours or other people's expectations for perfect performance, which I think are mostly our own. And those people who are inflexible, I think they're a minority, and I give them less importance in my mind than those people who are encouraging learners like I think that we are. Any other questions? We have like a few more minutes of kind of areas you're trying to break down the perfectionism that I might be able to help with. Wow, this is fun. I don't mind saying is I wish I could see your faces and interact with you live, but this feels pretty close that I get to see a little face bubble and a question. It's a close second to being able to see your faces directly. Okay, maybe I'll make one last comment. I'll reiterate something from the video in terms of tips, because somebody at the very beginning said, what are tips? Oh, wait, I'm just going to check here because there might be a last question. Yeah, good tips. Oh, okay, thanks, Amanda. So tips for the perfectionist. First of all, I would say to reduce expectations overall right now. So I hear all kinds of people who expect of themselves to be just as performing as ever. And I will say, and what I've noticed is a lot of perfectionists are unwilling to talk to others about the fact that they're feeling like they're not performing as usual. Like they don't want to break the secrecy of not feeling very productive. So find your trusted others, colleagues and friends, to just kind of float out there in a light way, just to say, you know what, some days I'm really finding it hard to keep up my usual productivity, because we already know that you're productive. Like the perfectionists are pretty hardworking, conscientious people, so we know that their standards are tough. And oftentimes people will say, oh yeah, I totally feel you. There are some days where I can just barely seem to get anything done. So dare to put out there that some days are not feeling so productive, to hear back, to break that expectation that we're supposed to be performing all the time. And secondly, so break the bubble, break the secrecy and the shame of I'm not performing at my best or at my top. Because I don't think anybody is right now, because everything is disrupted and changed and feels strange and we're feeling it. So that compromises performance. And then reset priorities. You know, like how can you reduce and create some space? One, to be able to be more likely to perform those things that you set out. So we talked about structuring and scheduling. So schedule and structure less, but put some scheduling and structuring in there, but prioritize. So when I do executive assessment, we assess for perfectionism, and often the perfectionists try to do everything and do everything well, and it just doesn't make sense. So prioritize means you're not trying to do everything and you're not trying to do everything well. So what am I trying to do that's particularly important, and how do I break this down and make this more achievable? Because that boosts mood, it boosts that sense of accomplishment, and it greases the wheel for more productivity. And the other thing I would say is, if you have less expectations overall, try and take that delicious space that's on there right now for sandbox time, for experimentation, because discovery in and of itself of trying something new is so rewarding. So if you say, okay, things that I'm good at, I'm going to just lighten the volume, and I'm going to try and lighten some of the percent of effort that I can really apply, so I can keep feeling like I'm producing good work in a zone that is already a high performance zone for me, but I'm going to lighten the expectations. With the space that's left over, what would I like to experiment with and expand my skills into a zone with low expectations of performance or perfection, but just really a space for me to try something, because I get bigger. I am more than I was before if I invite myself into this space with reasonable expectations. And that could be artistic, could be musical, could be projects that you've wanted to try around the house, could be connecting with people differently. I can't tell you how many people I've met who've never been on a video conference, and just learning what that feels like and seeing their own face on there broke down a barrier for them. So accepting an invitation to do something unfamiliar and finding out what it's like and adding that into your repertoire of things you know or things you have experience with that you can then continue and build upon is so rewarding. So I would make that as a last suggestion about what you might try to slip in there. So I want to thank you all so much for sharing in this first experience for me. I really enjoyed this, interacting with you, and I'll just give you a heads up that I will put together one on habit formation, because I think lots of people are trying to work on productivity and trying new things. And I'm also going to do a video on thinking patterns that get in the way or that can be enabling. So I certainly hope that I will get to see you on another one of these. And thank you again for coming today. Bye.